My name is April DeValkenaere. I am a white-collar crime paralegal for the Waukesha County District Attorney's Office. And today we're going to talk about reporting and investigation of financial scams. So this is the brief bio that was provided to you previously, so I'm not going to read through that, but it's essentially what we're going to cover. And just a clarification, because I know some of you were unable to hear Tiffany, I just wanted to kind of give you my quick bio. And these are all the different organizations that I'm currently a part of. I'm not going to go through them because you have access to them, but my information is provided at the end, and you will have access to this slide deck when we're finished. But also because I am certified by the State Bar of Wisconsin, I do have to also provide a disclaimer. Essentially, I'm not an attorney, so everything I say today is not considered legal advice. And the fact that the opinions expressed today are those of mine and not those of my district attorney's office. All right. Oh, sorry. I was trying to get out of the chat because I couldn't see it. I apologize. So what we're going to cover today, and I am going to move rather quickly because I want to make sure that we have time for questions at the end. But essentially what we're going to cover is who to report a financial scam to, how to report it, and then the process of the investigation through law enforcement, as well as the process through prosecution. So getting started, if you believe that you have been a victim of a scam, then essentially what you need is you need to gather all of the information that you have from that scam, and you need to have it all in one place so that you can report it. So we want to find out, especially if it was over the phone versus online, as much information as possible. Did the person provide their name, their phone number, their address, their email address, any type of an account information? If they're asking you to directly deposit, finances into a P2P account or into a bank account or at an ATM, what information did they provide you to do so? Because those are all questions that we're going to need you to be aware of so that we can report those to law enforcement and your financial institution. So gathering all that information is really ideal, and you want to do this as soon as possible, as soon as you realize that you may have been taken for a scam. And you need to realize too is you don't need to know for certain that it was a scam. You just have to question the fact that it might be a scam. And then if that's the case, we want you to make sure that you're reporting it. So the first thing that you need to do, a lot of people think they need to call law enforcement first. I don't want you to call law enforcement first. I want you to call your financial institution, your bank, your credit union, your investment company, any financial institution you may have given your sensitive information to a scammer. That's the financial institution I want you to contact immediately. Call them first. Tell them that you think you might have been a victim of a scam so that they can either freeze your account or they can make sure that they're only allowing things through that you have authorized, and you can set that up with them. But making sure that you're calling your financial institution first is imperative. From there, you're going to want to contact law enforcement if you've been a victim of a loss. So essentially, if you realize that you have been scammed, but you didn't actually fall for the scam, you don't need to report that to law enforcement. But if you have a financial loss or an asset loss of some sort, some of these scams are actually taking people who are trying to sell property. So maybe you would set up something to sell a vehicle. If they had took the vehicle for a test drive and then never came back, you lost property. You didn't necessarily give them your financial information. So there's kind of different pieces there. But if you have lost some type of money or asset, you definitely want to be contacting law enforcement. Some of the other things that you want to be doing is you want to be contacting the Federal Trade Commission, because a lot of times these actors are acting outside of the jurisdiction in which you live. And so your local law enforcement only has jurisdiction in that area. The Federal Trade Commission is a federal regulated agency, so they have jurisdiction generally nationwide, but they actually have it worldwide because they're federal, so they can actually go to other countries as well. So we want to make sure that you're contacting them as well, and they can be contacted generally just by filling out a form on their website, and I'll be giving you those links here momentarily. You can also choose a couple of different options. You can contact the Better Business Bureau via their scam tracker. You can contact the American Association of Retired Persons, or AARP, for their Fraud Watch network. Those are also resources you can utilize in advance. If you think something might be fishy, but you haven't really decided if you're gonna follow through with it because you're not real sure, you can actually go to the scam tracker or the Fraud Watch network, and you can identify if other people have already identified that that particular lottery scam, or that particular, other, auto theft scam or whatever has happened to other people in your area. They actually have a map, and it'll tell you of everything that's going on in the area. So how do you report it? You actually contact, your financial institution. So you would need to make sure that you know their phone number and their website, and then law enforcement, your local police department, and how do you want to report to them. The Federal Trade Commission, you can do it through their link of reportfraud.ftc.gov. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they have a way to report the fraudulent complaints as well. And those you can also do over the phone. If someone's maybe not comfortable doing it on the computer, you can do the Better Business Bureau at their scam tracker. And then again, AARP, both phone number and website. And again, since you'll get these slides in the end, you'll have access to all of these, and they're direct linked for you. So once we've determined that, there's a scam out there that you may have been a victim of, we need to try to determine the origin of the scam, if at all possible. So we want to find out, was it originated domestically, meaning in the US, or internationally? And the reason we want to do that is trying to figure out jurisdictional restrictions as to who can actually potentially do anything about that scam. Because if your scam, you were victimized here in Wisconsin, but it actually came from someone overseas, that's something your local jurisdiction law enforcement officer is not going to have access to follow up with. They can do certain things, and they can, follow up on certain things if it's domestically. So if there's and I know with a lot of spoofing of phone numbers and that in email addresses and websites and that type of thing, it's become much more difficult because they do make it look local. So your local law enforcement will be able to start that process. However, they may have to eventually to pass that off to a federal agency because of the fact that the scammer may be overseas. So one of the other things that we have to determine is if the funds associated with a financial scam are potentially recoverable. Here we have in the middle, we have some Bitcoins, which is to do with cryptocurrency. That once it's gone, typically at this stage in the game in our current economy, it's gone. There's really not a great way to try to recover cryptocurrency if it's been hacked, or if you've given out your personal wallet and somebody else, a fraudster, has taken money out of there. However, there are certain potential options if you've been scammed, that there is a way to potentially recover some of those funds. So that's why we contact you and ask you to contact your financial institution immediately, and then law enforcement, because there are certain steps that can help try to recover those funds. Wire frauds, typically once you do them, they're gone, but there are some ways that, if you catch it quick enough, you might be able to recover some of those funds. But the other piece is, if we find out that the scam is actually being coordinated locally, the sooner that we find out, the sooner we can try to access who those suspects are, and maybe shut down some of their bank accounts or try to freeze some of their funds that they have taken from you. So contacting your financial institution and contacting law enforcement are really imperative initially. From there, once we've made those determinations, what we need to do is we need to determine, what we can prove regarding the crime. And so there's different levels of proving evidence. So if you look at this, there's 4 different pieces here. Preponderance of the evidence or probable cause, that's actually what law enforcement needs to make an arrest. However, if it's being referred into a prosecutor's office for criminal charges, we actually have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest level burden of proving a case. So we have to believe that we have enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in court at a trial before we're going to charge a case. So we need to figure out kind of where that evidence lies and maybe what we need, what we have, and what we still need to gather. So here's a couple of different processes that we have to go through essentially. So once you actually report this scam to law enforcement is then going to, their patrol officer is going to refer it to the detective bureau. Their detective bureau is going to start an investigation. And then that investigation may come back to you because they need additional information that maybe you forgot to give them or patrol forgot to ask you for, or maybe you've been contacted since the original scam has occurred. Maybe you've been contacted by that fraudster, so they want some more information from you. They're then going to continue their investigation, and then they're potentially, if they believe they have enough evidence, they're going to refer it to the prosecutor's office for prosecution. From there, we have to determine the process of a decision to be made by the prosecutor's office. So we're going to take that report from law enforcement over here on the left, and we're going to assign that referral to an assistant district attorney. From there, we're going to review the elements of the crime requested for prosecution. So if somebody sends in a theft by fraud referral or a general theft referral or what have you, every crime identified in the state statutes has elements of that crime, and we have to be able to prove those, again, beyond a reasonable doubt. So we're going to review the reports and the evidence provided, and we're going to make a determination from there, do we have enough? If we think that we're missing something or we want to make our case stronger, we then will go and request additional information from law enforcement, which means that law enforcement officer, that detective, may be coming back to you yet again for additional information, for clarification, to find out whether or not you've been contacted anymore from that scammer. And then once the law enforcement officer receives that additional information, they are going to then have additional investigation as a team effort with our prosecutor's office. We're going to make sure that we're putting everything together because, again, we have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we can essentially win with the evidence we have at trial. So once we do that, we have this thorough investigation between law enforcement and the prosecutor's office. We then make a determination of the charges made by the prosecutor's office. And if that evidence to prosecute is there, we will then file a criminal complaint with the court. So we're going to go through that process a little bit here. So in the Wisconsin criminal court system, there are two options, essentially. There's a misdemeanor and there's a felony. And a misdemeanor is a crime that may be punishable by fines or commitment to a county jail, generally for 1 year or less. A felony is a crime that may be punishable by confinement in the state prison, generally for 1 year or more. So essentially, this is what it looks like, is once that charging decision is made by our district attorney or one of our assistant district attorneys, we're going to file those charges with the court, like I had indicated in the previous slide. Then what happens is the defendant actually has to come in for an initial appearance. And I'm not going to read through these because you'll actually end up with the slides. So I just want to kind of go through them for you. So that defendant will make an initial appearance. At that time, the court official will set bail, and they will determine whether or not that a defendant wants a prosecutor or not. I'm sorry, a defendant wants a state public defender or not, or if they're going to hire their own attorney. And they may also enter a plea. Generally, it's not guilty as they're moving forward. From there, on felony cases only, they'll have what's called a preliminary hearing. This essentially means that a court official will hear testimony in regards to the information provided in the criminal complaint. The court official will make a determination whether or not a felony crime has been committed, and if it is most likely had been committed by the defendant that we've charged. Then what happens is essentially that defendant would then be bound over for trial. Then an arraignment will occur, again, in felony cases only, and that essentially identifies for the defendant specifically what's included in the criminal complaint, and they have to make a plea at that time. And so that determination is made. Sometimes the preliminary hearing and the arraignments are done together, but sometimes they're done separately. It just depends on the case. Once that has occurred, or if this is a misdemeanor, the next thing that will start to happen in court will be motions. There'll be the defense and the state will be asking legal questions and trying to determine what evidence is going to be allowed at trial and what is not. So from there can be further proceedings. And further proceedings can actually happen before and after motions. And at some point, we will get to the point where all of the legal questions have been answered in regards to this case, and we will either have a trial or the defendant will decide to take a plea agreement. And so they will plead to the case. Once one of those two things happens, the defendant then goes to sentencing. So just as a graphic of what we just described is the same thing here. So essentially the district attorney makes the charging decision, initial appearance, preliminary hearing, and arraignment for felonies, further proceedings, motions, further proceedings, plea agreement or trial, and sentencing. This is part of the reason that people don't always realize like how long it actually takes to get through a court proceedings or a particular case. Is we have a lot of different moving parts in here that have to occur in a relatively short amount of time, or so we try to move them forward, but with the entire backlog of cases during the pandemic, it's been a difficult process. So things are moving much slower than normal. But I want to touch on a few things, and I know I'm going to go through these quickly, but I want to make sure you're aware of them. And I have statutes in here to kind of give you some resources if you want to look at these later. But essentially, when we talked about the collaboration of law enforcement and the prosecutor's office, we rely on some other things to help us in our investigations, and they are multidisciplinary teams, or MDTs. I know in the state of Wisconsin, a lot of MDTs are actually called I-teams or interdisciplinary teams. It's essentially the same thing. But there's a couple of different statutes that regulate these, and the MDTs talk about what an investigative agency is, who they are, and who has the authority essentially to work together. And specifically under 4690 sub 3 sub A, which talks about adult protective services or your department on aging, depending on which county you're in, it actually talks specifically about who can actually work together on these MDTs. So we can have both public and private entities, and we can all work together. We do that through what's called an MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding. And so there's actually state legislation that indicates how this should be happening and who should be having these. It also talks about the response of an investigation when elders or older adults at risk have become victims from scams. We can actually work together. APS and law enforcement can work together. APS can ask law enforcement to go out on calls with them, just like law enforcement can ask APS to go out with them. So if you've been a victim of a scam and other services might be of assistance, that's something that they can coordinate on and they can work together on. MDTs also provide a collaborative teamwork for everybody to work together, although we do it under strict confidentiality. We're making sure that we're not sharing PII or personal identifying information, but we want to network with each other prior to having to come together on a crisis case. If we're trying to work together, we want to make sure that everybody is safe. That's our primary responsibility. We want to make sure that we know who we can call and we know that they're going to come to the table and help us with this investigation. So some of the other things that MDTs do, we actually advocate for change and helping to identify service gaps within the agencies that we interact with. And so those are really important. I'd love to talk about them more, but that's for another day. A couple of the other pieces is just making sure we understand what's kind of going to be identified during the MTT and that collaboration and what we need to accomplish. So these are just a few of them, as is the next slide. So when it comes to those scams, we want to talk about the financial transaction trends and has this individual maybe fallen for a scam previously or not? Is there a way that we can help them stop that? Do we need to help them change their phone number? Is there a way that we can help them track their mail so that we, if they find that a scam is coming through the mail, that we can help stop that before they become a victim. But we also believe that the MDTs will help strengthen community relationships. And so we think that those are really important. We want to help improve their independence. And so that's where we try to bring everybody together. A couple last things here. One of the huge pieces of MDTs that has really worked well, and for those of you from Triad may have done these already for other industries, but essentially creating that flow chart illustrating how elder financial exploitation cases move through the system. It's really, really imperative. So everybody knows who has access and authority to do what. So it's a great tool. And just so you guys know, in addition to the MDTs that we have around the state of Wisconsin, there's also a couple teams called FAST, or Financial Abuse Specialist teams. Currently in the state of Wisconsin, we have two. We have Dane County and we have Waukesha County. And I know Milwaukee County is currently building theirs through their enhanced MDT grant. So we also have those resources in addition to the Department of Justice, who has grant funded a few elder abuse task forces around Wisconsin in Outagamie County, Door County, Milwaukee County, and Oneida Nation. So those are also tremendous resources to reach out to if you're looking for resources in regards to helping someone that's become a victim of a scam. One more thing on MDTs quickly is that we want to make sure that people realize that APS or anybody can refer cases to law enforcement, and then they should be being referred into our prosecutor's office. It's not the law enforcement's decision to make a charging decision. That's the prosecutor's decision. And so we want to make sure that those cases are not only getting to law enforcement, but they're also getting to the prosecutor. This is something that I wanted to throw in there quick, just because I know that there's some issues with regards to who has venue and where is it actually going to be charged. And so I wanted to put this in as a resource, but essentially anytime that a crime has two or more acts of it, we can charge that case where any single act occurred. We're just going to charge as a theft of course of conduct. And I know that gets a little hairy, so if you have further questions on that, let me know. The other piece is that, and this actually just gives you the specific statutes in the case law that talks about we can charge in any county where even a portion of that crime had occurred. And just for clarification, we wanted to make sure that everybody realized the statute of limitations. So for prosecution, for a felony, it has to be within 6 years, and for a misdemeanor, it has to be within 3 years. And then for depositions, we can actually require depositions of victims. And we usually want to try to do this as early on in the case as possible, only because we know that some of our victims may have health conditions or may be in the early stages of Alzheimer's or dementia. And so we want to make sure that we're capturing their memories as they have them now versus, a year and a half from now when we're actually getting to the point of trial. One other piece is that, and this is just some general information about how we can utilize other crimes as well in regards to like tax theft or something like that. If a fraudster is not claiming their fraudulent income on their taxes, we can actually charge them with tax theft as well. And then there's two more pieces of this quickly, and then I'll wrap up. But essentially, there's one thing everybody always has questions about as to how do we proceed if a victim is no longer available at the time of trial. And essentially, we make our cases a paper case. So we use all of the evidence. We use paper documents. We use financial bank statements. We use other witnesses. And so we try to bring in other people to try to speak for that victim because they're no longer available. And there's some good case law there that's mentioned on how we do that. The one last thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of people think that if they claim a defense of, I intended to return the money, that's a defense. And truthfully, under state statute, it is not. So we want to make sure people are aware of that as well. I have included a bunch of resources here that's available for you. And here's my contact information. So thank you very much.